For Jacques Rancière, it's a question of a double effect. The readability of a political signification and a sensible or perceptual shock caused conversely by the uncanny, which resists signification. Derrida's frame, for example, is itself a metaphor for the limits or rules of exclusion placed on discourse. And we see in Demet Taspinar's Where To, as well as in Noor Abed's We Both Know, a willful disregard of the integrity of the picture frame to intimate the permeability of boundaries, as well as the blind spots of our vision. In 1983, Shohei Imamura filmed The Ballad of Narayama, whose protagonist, Tatsuhei, must carry his mother Oren to the mountain to die of starvation, a tradition known as abasute. Noor Abed takes Imamura's indelible image of body transporting body across an inhospitable landscape. But rather than use cinematic standards of variable viewpoints, she maintains the distant view of surveillance. We bear witness from a remote, solitary position to the diminutive human figure carrying, in this case, dismantled pieces of an android figure, both folded into the black shadows and red rocks of the hillside. At once remote and close is the silence in Hakan Topal's Roboski, the restive stasis of the still life, or tableau vivant, opens onto the contradictory nature of description, both image and words, including stasis with its two meanings. In the first place, repose, state of rest, position, or arrest. And in the second, unrest, movement, revolt, and civil war. Roboski, in spite of being a document, testimony to the consequences of misrepresentation, is also a metaphorical image of great intensity through the inadequacy of representation to speak a truth it can only partially unveil. It is an aesthetic that cannot hold still, that flinches in the expectation of truth, but that ultimately speaks from within the fissures of contiguous relations. Transgression, transmutation, transcendence, transborder, interstices in the utopian real, art's moral compass.
Well, I'm going to.
I want to
do you want to introduce me?
you.
Okay. Yes,
Gerald Pryor. It's an honor to have you.
Hold on, please. So, Again, I want to thank Graciela to have me and to work with my panelists here, Kathleen and everybody. Thank you for joining us together and the audience. Fuck art! So I'm going to talk about the body in relationship to art. Now this is a steal from Joanna Freud, who stood up one time at a conference and said, "Fuck theory," and proceeded in fishnet stockings to unveil herself in relationship to an intimate position as a faculty to her students and as a speaker to a conference. So taking that to a certain degree, I'm going to say fuck art, where I mean when you make art, you have to be intimate with the wall. Somebody a long time ago, namely me, upon questioning by Dorothea Rockburn, said to her, art is fucking the wall. Intimate, and I said it out of a kind of gut reaction, intimate in the sense of method as well as subject. So the body that we see in all these videos, which are in some sense even buried in the code, are very important. For example, the movement of the boy in your piece mesmerized me. I mean, the color of the piece, the light that's coming off the carpet, the green of the wall, the tile, the hue, the notion of the wind maybe going through the floor. You saw the veils sometimes move. And I bought that it was their sons. So the action of the boy standing in front of the mother, holding maybe her older boy's picture, and then playing or trying to escape and then coming back. And also the piece that Kathleen talked about, Nora Abbott's piece, I thought was quite brilliant in the sense of the rocks being so present and dominant, and then the body coming across, first the movement of the body, and then in some sense the mannequin of the body. This is the Christ carrying the cross, or cross, trying to burden something going across a Sisyphus, climbing up the rocks. A long history of imaging here. But then a little bird flies across, quick. I don't know if you noticed, there was this blast, a little tiny speck that lands on the rock. When she's not present, and the person carrying is not, bang, the bird comes across. So those types of intrusions, or the shock that Kathleen talks about, is very important. And the shock happens by the body. The body is very, very important. And we have to understand that the body is all that we have left. Maybe there's more. But we witness through the body, we negotiate the shock of life through the body. The flaneur that Benjamin talks about is very, very important in terms of Baudelaire walking through Paris. We're walking through the city trying to figure things out. We're still trying to do that as an artist. And the categories that we're trying to figure out is the term that we're figuring out because we're using our body. We're figuring out to the outside world what we think is important. We're mapping, trying to make sense of certain kind of positions of meaning, but it's based on intimacy. So the body is very, very important. When you're working as an artist, you have to lay claim to the unknown. If you're moving towards somebody to make love, that's unknown. If you're moving towards a sheet of paper, that's an unknown. If you're working with your camera to the outside world, that's an unknown until something is manifest. And then when it's made, even in raw footage, it starts off another document or another position of unknowingness. So the constant position of an artist is unknowingness, once described as the Walensky brothers crossing a tightrope. When you cross the tightrope or go across Niagara Falls, or as the Pettit crossed, the World Trade Center, and everybody, you feel that you might fall. You don't quite know whether you're going to make it to the other side, which is okay, and there's a constant state of unknowingness. You leave it there. I'm very optimistic, if you get my drift. Perhaps romantic, because I was, in some sense, trained by those people way before postmodernism. I'm that old. So people like Barnett Newman and Harold Rosenberg and Clifford Still and people like that taught me. But I was working with Super 8 Film and knew Jonas Mekas in terms of 70 Green Street when Anthology Film Archives was down there, and saw Ronnie Rice and Stan Brakhage and a variety of other people do their work, which opened the door for me to think about working photographically, quite frankly. So to be here at Anthology Film Archives is a great, great boon. And for Jonas Mekas to create this strategy in an old abandoned courthouse down here in the 70s was a great, great option. Very wonderful for him. And I congratulate Graciela and Jonas and for you to come and hear us speak. I really congratulate most, though, the artists who've shown us their great work.
Thank you. Yes, I consider that everybody is giving a gift today. The ones who are listening and the ones that are showing something. So we have one more, 7 minutes, is Zuzulich.
Primera cuestión, ¿qué es una heterotopía? Contrariamente a la utopía, que es lo que no tiene lugar, la heterotopía puede entenderse como una utopía efectivamente emplazada. La heterotopía es un lugar que, por estar regido por normas diferenciadas a las que regulan nuestro comportamiento social cotidiano, tiende a producir un tipo de experiencia diferenciada en un marco temporal que le es propio a este lugar otro, temporalidad a la que Foucault denomina heterocronía. Resumo: emplazamiento efectivo, espacialidad otra, orden propio, experiencia diferenciada y temporalidad alterada. Para entender bien, pongamos dos ejemplos extremos. La biblioteca o el museo, con su extrema clasificación, se convierte en un ideal del orden perfecto. Todo puede ser encontrado y todo allí encuentra lugar. El burdel podría verse como una suerte de caos si lo contrastamos con nuestra cotidianeidad. Por lo tanto, creo que la heterotopía tiene un potencial político extremo, aunque reconociendo que no siempre lo efectiviza. Potencial que tiende a producir eso que Jacques Rancière llamó el reparto de lo sensible. Esto es, abrir una nueva posibilidad para que los cuerpos construyan una experiencia sensible y diferenciada a partir de la irrupción de ese espacio otro en el mundo real. Segunda cuestión, ¿cómo podemos pensar la relación heterotopía-experiencia estética? Como ya señalé, es posible pensar que el museo se ha convertido en una heterotopía ligada a la experiencia estética, en tanto constructor de una espacialidad otra asignada por la idea de orden. En tal sentido, el museo, al igual que las exhibiciones que contiene, intentan que los visitantes internalicen el orden discursivo que sus relatos curatoriales despliegan. Por el contrario, aquellas prácticas artísticas que emergen hacia finales de la década del 50 y comienzo de los 60 vehiculizan un nuevo sentido para la experiencia estética que contradice la institucional. En la medida en que la obra se espacializa, se constituye como lugar, instala una nueva lógica experiencial que desplaza el ocularcentrismo, ese modo de comprensión ligado a la mirada de manera excluyente e interpela al cuerpo con todo su potencial sensorial. Esto es, el cuerpo se integra en dicha espacialidad y se entrega a la propuesta enigmática que la obra, convertida ahora en espacio, le plantea. Así, la obra espacializada, irrumpiendo en lo real, explora su radical potencialidad política en la medida en que la utopía se ha vuelto lugar para la experiencia sensible. Para finalizar, quisiera compartir con ustedes algunos ejemplos que permitan anclar lo desarrollado hasta aquí. En la primera parte del video Tres Transiciones, de 1973, Peter Campus realiza una ejemplar intervención en nuestra realidad inmediata. El artista lleva adelante un procedimiento particular dentro de la realidad ficcional de su video. Rasga la pantalla y la atraviesa con su cuerpo. En las décadas del 50 y del 60, el argentino Lucio Fontana, en su serie Concepto Espacial, realiza algo similar, una profunda incisión en la superficie de la tela blanca de un bastidor. Con ese gesto, ambos artistas intervienen en nuestra realidad inmediata deconstruyendo la superficie en donde tradicionalmente se ha inscripto la representación. Frente a nuestros ojos, el dispositivo que ocluía el artificio naturalizado se nos vuelve ahora evidente. La incisión, el corte violento de la pantalla y la tela lo ha hecho posible. Podríamos pensar que tanto las videoinstalaciones como las instalaciones interactivas se convierten en localizaciones efectivas promotoras de experiencias diferenciadas, descentradoras del sujeto ocular centrista. En tal sentido, hay en ellas, de manera implícita, un gesto político que sostiene dicha intervención. De la misma manera que en la emergencia del dispositivo de la realidad aumentada, en tanto mixtura entre el espacio real y la imagen digital, permeabilizando un grado mayor de apertura que en las antecedentes. Por último, simplemente mencionar un ejemplo del ámbito de la gestión cultural en Buenos Aires. This is not a gallery es un proyecto que permite que los transeúntes puedan visualizar un video a través de una mirilla situada en el frente de una casa. Este proyecto tensiona la relación entre afuera y adentro, tendiendo a provocar una reflexión acerca de la distinción lábil entre lo público y lo privado. En la década del 40, el escritor argentino Jorge Luis Borges inauguraba una modalidad literaria inaudita hasta entonces. En muchas de sus ficciones la realidad no aparece como el sustrato de la literatura, sino que, por el contrario, la ficción opera sobre la realidad hasta intervenirla por completo, hasta mimetizarse con ella. Tal vez, en la heterotopía de Foucault, resuene algo de esta lógica ficcional que irrumpe en nuestra realidad inmediata para modificar definitivamente nuestra experiencia.
A state of sentient interaction, something like that. What was the exact quote?
A condition of sentient engagement.
Sentient. Can you say a little bit more about that? It's kind of a fascinating.
Yeah, it's
notion.
you know it's really the core definition of aesthetic when you trace it back to the roots of the word. That aesthetics is how it got to beauty. You know, that took hundreds of years. Initially, it was this idea of how we perceive through touch, through sight, through hearing, through taste. Again, Gerald Pryor's body, that emphasis on the body that we saw in the videos. So it's a perceived, it's not a rational experience. Thank you. I'd like to ask Hakan a question. Could you extrapolate more on the sense of silence in your piece? Because you've also written and engaged with silence as kind of a broader concept, and I'm wondering how you're thinking about it.
Thank you for asking. I mean, the context of this work is very big. That's why I didn't want to go and then start talking, because I tend to talk a lot, and then people know me here, know that. So of course, like the idea of silence is very important. In general, a lot of artists use silence, even the musicians, and Antarctica piece, and even DJ Spooky. A lot of people that who engage with nature, understanding, listening, is about silence in a way. But for me, the silence, using the silence as not a metaphor, but a space that we can listen. But I used the sound, actually. It wasn't a silent video. It was the atmospheric sound. All the sounds that they were doing, it was there. So I want to not, of course, like when I went there in 2012, there was an emergence of the war between PKK and Turkish military. So I went to the village, and everybody told me that not to go. So when you go that kind of situations, you drive, and then you have the car noise, and then the music in the car, and then you stop. Then you realize, like you mentioned, the bare life, right? The life that cannot politically resist, that is so vulnerable in a certain way. That moments that I could sense that the idea of danger in a way that grasp you. And of course, these people's, like, the life is precarious. They are like living through smuggling gas, and all the livelihood is taken by the state because they burn their villages, they force migrate them, etc., etc. So, and I wanted to use the silence as a space because I didn't want to create a moment of a victimization through any kind of a music, sound, or even the narrative voice of a powerful male or female telling the story of those people. Because I realized when I went there, of course, these are very villagers living in very precarious conditions, but at the same time, their political will or the political agency was so strong that I learned a lot. Then I realized that then I should put the camera, and I wasn't planning doing this kind of raw footage because I was thinking that I would edit them together. I collected a lot of materials like this, like silent 4 or 5 minute shots. And I asked people that this could potentially be a video monument. A monument for that Roboski village, never actualized, but I wanted to do this silent because monuments are always in a way silent. So, thanks for asking.
It also seems to me to be almost a necessary contradiction that in a way you're expressing the struggle for legitimacy, and that is typically a struggle through voice. And yet sometimes our presence is so marginalized that our voice doesn't exist. And so silence almost emphasizes that aspect.
One thing I would ask is the captioning. In other words, you give us a kind of paragraph to begin. And first off, I couldn't go through it quick enough, to let you know. But second of all, I don't think it's necessary. You know, if I was asking maybe why, which I'm asking. For example, I went to the Tisch show of photography because I am at NYU in the other side in the art department. They're in the film department. But Deb Willis has a whole pile of artists working there, including some of my former students, which is nice, teaching. And then they do a show of their faculty. So I went to see the show. And there's a body of work, and each body of work has really a paragraph next to it. And I kept thinking, well, why? Why is this absolutely necessary? Because a lot of the work had to do with like being in a forest and liking the sunlight. But then, you know, they really had to give the coordinates of why they were in that forest in a way to be able to see the three images next to each other of the forest and the sunlight. And I couldn't understand why we as a viewer couldn't just read with our bodies, quote unquote, what was there to maybe simulate the possibility of why the artist made this setup, to have a kind of discussion with the artist, or to have the artist present physically in their own work. So I really kind of dismissed the paragraph too. Whether you know whether it is a particular position in terms of the Turkish-Iraq border, we get at the end where you say filmed at such and such a place, 2012, which gives us some sense of what maybe is occurring if we read the New York Times, maybe. Okay? So should the opening paragraph be there or not?
Thank you for the credit. But I appreciate your comment. Of course, there is always a struggle when I'm presenting the work, especially the context like this. There's always a struggle that should I contextualize it or let it be. So we are talking about bare life, but I also want to talk about the bare images, right? The images cannot hold themselves. The images cannot sustain their existence. The images does not have an agency to talk about themselves, right? They become just a form or some sort of a mystical content.
Okay.
So like I'm always like bothered, but of course Roland Barthes wrote about this a lot, right? Because Roland Barthes said that photography cannot say anything. Doesn't say anything basically unless you tell them to say something. You contextualize them in an exhibition environment. You do the caption. You do put a location and a date. You do some form of a contextualization. Right. Of course, I understood your criticism as your contextualization is a bit too much. You put them into this like a this very tight frame. But I'm coming from more like not from a fine artist background, more like a sociological, political activist background. So therefore, like my conceptual operation, if you will, usually, I mean, not in this case, because in this case you're right. It could have been like just let it be because I'm here, I can talk about it.
Yeah.
But in an exhibition environment, I think it is not the curator's responsibility, but it is the artist's responsibility to take charge of the text.
Okay.
Because like what you described in what happens in Met, I think it is somebody else is framing artist's work. And I think artist has to be aware when they are doing this framing.
Okay.
I don't know I answered you, but
You did?
yeah, but I would like to ask Alejandro about the because you portrayed a techno vision. A techno-political vision is very utopian in the sense that not dystopian, right? Because you said this possibilities of this like a clean slate, if you will, of the computer code or screen. As a new media practitioner, I am always fascinated and then I'm always engaged with the possibilities. But at the same time, I am skeptical about the techno-utopian visions in some aspects. Like, can you elaborate it? I'm sure that you're also critical. You're still coming from Argentina.
Sí. Can I answer in Spanish, maybe?
Sure.
Yo creo que sí, efectivamente mi visión es positiva en relación a las posibilidades tecnológicas.
Yes, my vision is positive with the technological advance.
Pero también estoy de acuerdo con vos en ser escéptico en muchos casos, no diría pocos, sino muchos casos.
But I agree with you that in many cases I'm also skeptic.
Siento quizás como una responsabilidad generacional de hacerme cargo de reflexionar sobre eso que está sucediendo.
Say that again?
Siento una responsabilidad generacional
I feel a generational responsibility
de reflexionar sobre esto.
to reflect about this.
Thank you for
I think we can continue this interesting conversation with wine and cheese.
Okay.
Thank you all. I'm very excited and very proud of all your presentations and of your presence, and I hope we can continue with this type of events. Thank you.
Gracias.
Okay,
Muchas gracias.
gracias.